I'm going to start off by saying something that could be considered offensive, uncomfortable at first, but it is definitely a message that you need to hear. Many of us are not tired because we are too busy. Some of you may be saying, okay, you don't understand my situation. No, I need you to hear me. Many of us are not tired because we are too busy. I've said in many different podcast episodes that America really celebrates being busy, but the real reason that many of us are tired is because we do not have a genuine trust in God. And I'm not saying that to be harsh. I'm just being completely honest with you because a lot of us believe in God, but yet whenever it comes to control and everything in our life, we believe that it all depends on us. We can rest our bodies, we can take days off of work, we can go on vacation. I want you to picture a vacation that you've gone on where you thought, okay, I'm going to go over there, it's going to be a good time, I'm going to hang out on the beach, I'm going to go to the mountains, and you spend money on souvenirs. You come back home, and when you come back, you are just as anxious, you are just as tense, you're just as tight, you are just as exhausted as when you left. Sure, you might have a couple of more memories and less money in the bank account, but it really didn't change as much as you thought that it was going to change. And that tells us something really important. The pace of life can change, and our exhaustion is not about that pace, but instead, our exhaustion actually comes from pressure in our life. The Bible has been talking about this kind of rest for generation after generation. And this is where the Bible's definition of rest differs from ours. As I was actually going to create this episode, I reached out to a friend of mine and said, "Hey, I know that you're strong in the faith. What does it mean to rest in the Lord?" And he said, "Oh, I've heard that phrase a lot, but I don't think that I actually know what it means now that I'm thinking about it. I guess if I were to say anything, it just means, not doing anything on Sundays, kicking back, watching TV, just giving my body a rest, getting it ready for the upcoming week." And again, that's where the biblical definition of rest is very different than our general idea of what it means to rest. And here's the lens that I want us to use. Biblical rest is not about stopping work. Biblical rest is about stopping self salvation. It is about stopping self salvation. That sentence alone explains more about our exhaustion today than any productivity podcast or theology podcast ever could. And let's go all the way back. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, where it says God finishes creating the world. And on the seventh day, he rested. So that word rest in this case is the word Shabbat, which sounds a whole lot like Sabbath. It's where the whole idea of Sabbath comes from. This word does not mean that God is wiped out. In Hebrew, it literally means to stop, to cease, to celebrate, or to rest. On the seventh day, God celebrated. Um, God stopped. God stopped because he had nothing left to prove. Nothing is unfinished. Nothing is uncertain. And here's a detail that I recently discovered that it changed a whole lot for me. It changed my perspective. The very first day, the very first day that humans ever experienced, it was not a work day. It wasn't. It was a rest day. It was a day for Adam and Eve to celebrate creation. Adam and Eve, they didn't have to wake up and earn their value. They woke up inside of value created by God. Before they produced anything, before they achieved anything, before they proved anything or provided anything. They rested. They rested in what God already did. And right there, the Bible sets a pattern that we have been fighting as humans ever since. We were created to live from God's work, not to secure our worth through our own work. That's why when we rest, it feels really dangerous. It does, because rest forces us to face a question that we've been avoiding. That question is, if I stop, if I stop working so hard, if I stop trying to control everything, will God really handle this? Now let's fast forward a few centuries. Let's go to the book of Exodus. For those that aren't too familiar with the book of Exodus, the Israelites were sold into slavery to the Egyptians. Now, at this time, Egypt, it was not just a place that you could locate on the map. Sure, you could point to Egypt on a map, but it was a system. They were a superpower of the ancient world, and for a good reason. Egypt was not just a place, it was a system. And in Egypt, your value was based upon your output, it was based upon productivity. Your worth was dependent upon your productivity. Rest was not an option. Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, never commands rest. So when God later rescues the people of Israel, calls them out of Egypt, out of slavery, into the wilderness, he says, stop once a week. He's not managing stress, but he is breaking a mindset that has been solidified for generation after generation. And when you try to break a mindset that's generations old, it's going to be hard. But God is pushing against this mindset. He's saying you're no longer slaves. You don't work to survive. You rest because I provide. And that's why the Sabbath applied to the Israelites, it applied to their servants, the foreigners, because rest was not a luxury for just the high priest. It wasn't a luxury for just your neighbor around the corner. Rest was a declaration for God's people. He was saying, this is not Egypt anymore. That's huge. This is not Egypt anymore. And if we're honest, this is where the Bible starts to get really uncomfortably modern. Because I don't know what it is in your life right now, but you have your own form of Egypt. We may not live under a pharaoh, under a ruler making us work, but we do live in a system that constantly tells us if you stop producing, you don't matter. Again, we live in a culture that really celebrates being busy. We think that's where our worth comes from. And the minute that we stop working, we stop producing, then we feel as if we don't matter. And over time, the Bible starts to name something even deeper. Because even when Israel had a Sabbath, their hearts were still extremely restless. I want to go to one of my favorite Psalms. We're going to look at Psalm 62, where it says, my soul finds rest in God alone. This is a short psalm, but man, is it powerful. Listen to that again. My soul finds rest in God alone. That word rest does not mean inactivity. It actually means stability. It means that we should not have any anxiety in our hearts. We shouldn't be a panicked people. And that word alone matters because most of us try to rest in control. We try to rest in certainty, in success. We try to rest in approval. But those things can never carry the weight that we try to give them. And that's why anxiety doesn't disappear when life gets easier. I have definitely experienced a wide variety of seasons lately. Last year, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you may be familiar. I lost my job back in May. And right after that, we found out that we were pregnant with our first child. And we gave birth to a beautiful baby girl on December 31st of 2025. And I wouldn't say that the season that we're in is the easiest season I've ever had, but there are definitely seasons of life that are harder than others, that are different than others, some that are easier. And if we do not understand certain things like giving up control and certainty and trying to prove that we're successful, we're going to carry anxiety through whatever season of life we're in. And if we do understand and have a good foundation of what it means to rest in the Lord, what we're going to find is that anxiety and panic, it'll disappear as that trust gets deeper, as seasons in life change. And let's go ahead. We're going to bring Jesus into this mix because we need to introduce him into this long conversation about rest. Jesus says something that sounds really gentle to us, but if we think about how culture and society was back then, what he said was extremely disruptive. Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened." That word weary means worn down from carrying a weight for too long. I don't know what it is that's weighing you down in your life right now, but there's something in your life, I promise you, that you're feeling a little bit weary about. It was never really your weight to carry. And then he says, "Take my yoke upon you." The yoke that I'm talking about is not from an egg. What a yoke is, it took me a little while to figure out what this was. If you're not familiar, a yoke is a wooden beam that you would put across livestock as you were plowing the fields, because the two animals would work together and the stronger of the two animals would carry most of the load. When we hear the phrase, "take my yoke upon you," a lot of us think that that means, hey, I'm just going to give it to God and he's going to do 100% of the work. And that's not what he's saying here. Jesus is not saying that he's going to completely take my responsibility away. What he's saying is that there's going to be a shift. It's going to be less responsibility, but it's going to be a shared responsibility. That's why he says, "Learn from me." Because rest is not that it comes naturally to us. It is something that's going to have to be learned. And anything that you have to unlearn after a lifetime of self salvation, which, let's face it, our culture today does a really good job of indoctrinating people that you can save yourself, you can make your absolute own way in this world, and if you just work harder, then you can have everything that you possibly imagined. You try to create your own life, you try to save your own life, and that's not healthy. Anything that you have to unlearn after a lifetime of self salvation is going to be really uncomfortable. You're going to have so much pushback when you are trying to break things that have been around for generation and generation and been so intertwined into culture. You're going to experience the devil. I promise you're going to experience the devil. There's going to be a lot of pushback. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to be extremely important. So if rest is something that is offered to the Israelites, and then later is offered to all of God's people under the new covenant, why does rest still feel so hard for us to find? And to find the answer to that, I went to the book of Hebrews, where it says, "There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God." In order to experience this rest in the Lord, you need to experience a relationship with the Lord. And the sentence from Hebrews should stop us because it means that rest is real. It is something that can be experienced. Rest is open to the people of God, and that rest does not come naturally. It's not automatic. Hebrews looks back at Israel and says they didn't miss rest because they were busy. They missed rest because they didn't trust God, which is wild because God delivered them from the Egyptians, one of the largest, most powerful nations of the world at that time. God delivered them. God split the Red Sea to outrun the Egyptians. And still, they thought that God wasn't big enough to put their trust in. I'm blown away by all of that. But Hebrews is very clear. You cannot enter rest while you are constantly insisting on having control of everything in your life, because control is not neutral. Control is a rival to God. And I'm going to say that control is a rival God. And this is where American Christianity really needs to slow down and listen. A huge caution. Our culture does not reject rest. It doesn't. I'm not advocating that our culture rejects rest as a whole. But I am going to say that the American culture postpones rest. It says that you can't rest until after you're successful. You can't feel peace until after there is some resolution, after some certainty in your life, and that you can only be worthy after you achieve something. So we live with this constant low grade anxiety. If you do research, you would discover that we live in the most anxiety medicated time in history. And I do believe that there are anxiety, mental differences, mental disorders, but there are also seasons in life where you can experience anxiety, and they're not the same thing. So we live with this constant low grade anxiety. We're always trying to optimize ourselves, our environment. We're always trying to improve. We are always trying to prove ourselves. And Jesus looks at us and he says, "That yoke that you're carrying right now, that yoke that you're carrying, yeah, that didn't come from me. So what does it actually mean to rest in the Lord?" It looks like something that is really hard for me. I'm a chronic overthinker. Maybe you are too. My brain says, if this happens, then this could be the outcome. If this happens over here, then this could be the outcome. And I read a book at the beginning of every year called Winning the War in Your Mind by Craig Groeschel. It's a fantastic book that talks to you about how you can identify lies that the enemy is telling you, how you can replace them with the Word of God in order to use uh, the Word of God as a sword against the tricks of the enemy. And if I'm not careful, I can fall into something that is really unhealthy. But the very first thing on what it means to rest in the Lord is to stop the rehearsal of the worst case scenarios in your head. Just stop. Easier said than done. I get it. If that means that you need to spend more time in God's Word, spend more time in God's Word. I highly recommend that you read the book Winning the War in Your Mind. There's another book called Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table. Or in some cases, if it gets really bad, you may need to seek the help of a mental professional. Whatever the cause is, you need to stop the rehearsal of the worst case scenarios in your head. Then you also need to treat anxiety as a warning light in your life, not a label. Stop wearing anxiety on your chest like a name badge. Just because you may experience anxiety or you have anxiety does not mean that your entire life is going to be ruled by that label. Anxiety, believe it or not, is a warning light that our bodies have to tell us that something is off in this. So if you are experiencing anxiety, see it as a warning light, not as a label. You are not anxiety. I don't know who needs to hear this next one, but you need to obey what God has already shown you. Some of us, and this has definitely been me in the past, I cannot tell you how many times I've done this, but I would pray about something and God would give me an answer, but it wasn't the answer that I wanted. So I would still hold on to what God said was not for me. But I would pray, God, are you sure that this isn't for me? That this is what I want? Could you just change your mind and could you make this your will instead? That's extremely dangerous. I don't know who needs to hear this, but you've got to stop obey, or you have to start obeying what God has already shown you. And in order to do that, it would require you releasing outcomes. Release outcomes that were never meant for you to control. I don't know, again, who needs to hear that. If you hear something from God, then listen to what he says. And if you've been praying about something and you still haven't heard an answer, keep praying. Keep on praying until you hear an answer. And just when you hear the answer, say, "Here I am, Lord. Yes, Lord, use me for your will." I don't care how uncomfortable it is. What I've discovered is when I let go of what's not for me and I start stepping into what God has for me, it's a much more beautiful place than I could have ever imagined. I would not be in the house that I'm in. I would not be at the church where I am. I would not have the wife and the daughter that I have if I didn't make some uncomfortable decisions and lean into what I felt God was calling me to do. You have to release outcomes that were never meant for you to control, and you have to obey what the Lord is telling you. And understand that rest does not remove responsibility from you, but it does remove the illusion that everything in your life depends on you. In Hebrews, it also says, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." It doesn't say someday. It doesn't say when life calms down. It doesn't say when I'm comfortable, when anxiety goes away, not when you feel ready. It says today, if you hear God's voice. So Jesus may not be telling you that you need to quit your job. He might, but he might not be telling you to quit your job. What he is asking you to quit is to quit pretending like you're God. You are not the God of your own life. Society may push that agenda, but I promise you, you're not the God of your own life. Stop pretending like you're God. And here's a question that I want to leave you with. What do you need to release control of and trust God with in order to finally rest? In order to rest, we need to feel peace in body, soul, and mind. If any of those are out of order, if any of those are not being experienced, then you are not truly resting in the Lord. You need to be able to slow down, to feel peace, to be released from anxiety, from this pressure that you have to be in control. And also, it's slowing down enough to celebrate and appreciate what God has made. So, what do you need to give up control of in order to trust God? And finally, rest. And if this is an episode that stirred something up with inside of you, I don't want you to rush past this. I actually want you to sit with this, and I want you to pray about it. I want you to be in deep prayer about something in this podcast. And maybe, just maybe, you will stop carrying what was never meant for you to carry in the first place. I do want your help. Something that is going to happen in future episodes. I'm still piecing together a structure and gathering some information. That's where I need your help. In the description of this podcast, in the description of this YouTube video, there are going to be some links for you to fill out. You could fill out one, you could fill out all of them. These forms, it might ask for your name, but none of this is for the collection of your information to email you anything unless you explicitly say that you want, something emailed to you. But these 4 forms that I'm linking down below for you, one of them is for you to share your testimony. I'm going to get to the point on this show where I'm starting to share some testimonies, and I would love to hear yours. Maybe yours would be shared on a future episode if you provide consent. If you have any prayer requests, hey, going through something, you need just additional prayer warriors, you can share that with me. I'll share it with my family, with my team. We're going to be praying for you. All of these can be anonymous if you choose to be. Any praise reports, an answered prayer, or an unexpected blessing that God has provided for you, and any questions or uncertainties, doubts that you have about the faith. If you want a member of my team to reach out and talk to you about that, be more than happy to do that. Or it may be a question that I know a lot of different people have, and so it might be the topic of a future episode. But please head on down to the description, pick any of the forms or all of the forms, fill them out, and help out the show. So if you are watching this on YouTube, please make sure that you are subscribed. We're going to be diving deeper into the Word to help you develop a deeper relationship with God, a better understanding of who God is. And if you are listening to this episode, then please make sure that you are downloading this podcast to help the show grow. Share it with somebody who you think might feel a little bit exhausted, maybe a little bit tired, or just anybody that you think wants to have a deeper relationship with God. And thank you very much for all of your support. This has been another episode of the Joshua Bridwell Show. Tune in next time. Let's grow, and God bless.